This all began when I was hanging out at my childhood best friend's place for what was supposed to be a simple movie night. We hadn't seen each other in a while and were catching up. Her apartment had a warm and cozy feel, a little messy but filled with cute decorations that made it feel like home. We were both in our comfiest loungewear, ready to binge-watch some princess movies. Her place wasn't the tittiest. Things were scattered here and there, but it was clean and felt genuine, which I always loved. We decided to order pizza for dinner. She casually mentioned that Jasper, someone I hadn't met before, would be bringing it. At first, I was annoyed, assuming she had invited another friend, a guy no less, to crash our girls' night, which wasn't what I had expected. But I was wrong. Jasper was just the pizza delivery guy. When he arrived, something about him felt off. He seemed nervous, fumbling with the boxes and barely making eye contact. My friend introduced us quickly, and I noticed how overly grateful she was, as if Jasper did more than just deliver food. He handed over the pizzas, and there was a brief moment of forced small talk. My friend was overly kind to him despite his awkwardness. He wasn't great at conversation and looked completely out of place. Then Jasper asked for my number. I felt put on the spot because my friend was sitting right there. Not wanting to seem rude, I gave it to him. He chatted for a few minutes before my friend gave him a gentle nudge to leave, saying something like, "Thanks so much for bringing this." He seemed to get the hint. We both gave him a quick hug before my friend politely said, "Drive safe." Another clear sign it was time to go. Curious, I asked my friend what the deal was. She explained that Jasper was basically her unpaid errand boy. He picked up groceries, grabbed takeout, and did other small favors. It seemed like Jasper was just a lonely guy desperate for some kind of connection, especially with women. My friend and I were young and a bit immature back then, around 22, but we both sensed something was off about him. We just couldn't put our finger on what exactly. Jasper later started a group chat with my friend and me, but he didn't say much. Every couple of weeks, he'd send a meme, like he was trying to stay in our lives without being too intrusive. It felt like he had been ignored or even blocked by girls before, so he was being careful not to give us a reason to cut him off completely. That was just my impression, of course. I don't know for sure what he was thinking. He also kept offering to run errands. The first time, I politely declined, but he kept asking every weekend. Eventually, I made the mistake of accepting his help. I had found a great deal on a used washing machine online, but I had no idea how to pick it up and install it. When I mentioned this in the chat, Jasper eagerly volunteered to handle everything. He picked it up, set it up, and saved me a huge headache. I tried to pay him for his help, wanting to show appreciation, but he wouldn't take any money. After I insisted, he suggested I could repay him by going on a short hike with him instead, just as a way to even things out. That made me uncomfortable. It felt too personal, almost like a date. But he framed it as nothing more than a casual favor in return for a favor. Against my better judgment, I agreed, telling myself it was just a way to say thank you. Plus, he didn't seem to have many friends, and maybe he just wanted some company. Still, I was uneasy about going on a hike with him in such a secluded area. The day of the hike arrived, and Jasper picked a trail not too far away. I had been there before. It was beautiful. As we walked, he chatted about regular things, his job, the weather, his hobbies. Everything seemed normal. Then he suggested we step off the main path to check out something special he wanted to show me. That's when we found the body. My heart pounded as I took in the scene. Jasper, on the other hand, was eerily calm, too calm. The way he stood there, unbothered, made my stomach turn. It wasn't just that he had led me to a corpse. It was the casualness in his demeanor that truly unsettled me. It smelled bad, but not as awful as I expected. It must have been there for a while. I'm no expert, but it seemed like the worst of the decomposition had already passed. My mind raced. Was this some kind of sick joke? A test to see how I'd react? Or was he trying to subtly warn me, as if saying, "I know about things like this"? Or maybe, in some twisted way, he just wanted to make himself unforgettable. Some people only exist in your mind while you're around them, but maybe Jasper wanted to ensure I'd never forget him. I made up an excuse about needing to get back quickly and started walking toward the main trail, urging Jasper to follow. My gut told me this was a mind game, his way of showing me he wasn't just some harmless guy who ran errands. I was terrified. As we walked, I desperately scanned for other hikers, rangers, anyone who could make me feel less alone. The moment I spotted someone, I called out to ask for directions, though I wasn't really lost. I just wanted an extra person near us. I kept pressing for clarification on the directions until the man agreed to walk us back to the parking area. I wasn't going to take no for an answer. When we reached the lot, I immediately called my friend, telling her I was with Jasper and that he'd be dropping me off soon. That was my way of putting it on record. If anything happened, people would know I was last seen with him. I also texted my friend right away, detailing what had happened so there'd be a record of that too. When we got to her apartment, we thanked Jasper and sent him on his way. My friend already knew from my texts, but when I explained the full details, the bugs, the decaying face that was still recognizable, her expression turned to horror, not just because of the body, but because of how disturbingly casual Jasper had been about it. She admitted she had always felt something was off about him, but never imagined anything this extreme. We agreed that we needed to cut Jasper out of our lives. The problem was, she had come to rely on him too much for errands. We devised a slow fade-out plan. We'd only interact when others were around, respond to his texts less and less, and I would never ask him for anything again. Over time, my friend would also start asking for less help. Jasper kept messaging, still offering to run errands, but my friend would reply with things like, "I'm trying to be more independent, but you've been such a help." Eventually, she started dating someone new and introduced him to Jasper. After that, Jasper never reached out again. I reported what we saw to the police that night. Took months before I heard anything. About 4 months later, I saw a news report about a body found in the area where Jasper had taken me. They arrested someone, not Jasper, but another man he followed on social media. I have no idea if Jasper was actually connected or just happened to know about it. Looking back, if there's one lesson I learned, it's this: trust your gut. Hey there, my name is Daniel, and I work as a research associate at the University of Alberta. My area of expertise lies in atmospheric sciences, which is basically a broad study of weather and climate that overlaps with fields like chemistry, mathematics, soil science, and engineering. As you can imagine, a lot of our work in recent years has revolved around climate change. However, at the start of this year, I was given the chance to be part of a rather unique and unexpected research initiative in partnership with the University of Central Asia's Tashkent campus, located in Uzbekistan. Our goal was to translate and verify a collection of previously unexamined research data that had recently been declassified by the Uzbek government. To understand why this project even existed, you need to know two things. First, unlike many former Soviet republics that went through significant upheaval after the collapse of the USSR, Uzbekistan's leadership was almost immediately centralized under a man named Ali Khan Makhmudov. This guy was, to put it mildly, eccentric. He did things like rename the country's capital after himself, import palm trees to create artificial beaches, and construct enormous, futuristic-looking buildings that had no real use, empty skyscrapers that served purely aesthetic purposes. During his swift consolidation of power after the Soviets left, Makhmudov ordered the immediate lockdown of all government-owned facilities in the country, including numerous Soviet-built scientific research stations. While other former Soviet nations gradually opened up their archives to international researchers throughout the 1990s, Uzbekistan did the opposite. Makhmudov and his administration seized every bit of research data they could find and kept it tightly guarded, supposedly to prevent it from falling into the hands of foreign intelligence agencies. Whether he was genuinely trying to protect national assets or just hoarding information to maintain control, the result was the same. Most of that Soviet-era scientific data remained sealed away until his resignation in early 2022. After his departure, Uzbekistan's two largest universities, one of which had been renamed in his honor, applied for access to these long-hidden archives. By working with the multinational University of Central Asia, they enabled scholars like myself, based at the University of Alberta, to finally examine the data. The first challenge was gaining access to these old Soviet records. The second, however, was the process of validating them. To say that Soviet-era scientific methodology was inconsistent would be an understatement. Credit where it's due, Soviet advancements in space exploration and military technology were impressive, but in other fields, politics often took precedence over scientific integrity. A notorious example of this was the Soviet agronomist Trofim Lasovsky, who, under Stalin's rule, dismissed geneticists as enemies of the people and insisted that mathematics had no place in biology. His misguided policies led to widespread famine, causing millions of deaths across the Soviet Union and China. Critics who dared to speak against him often found themselves imprisoned or worse. So you see the problem. Much of my job after translating the documents was to analyze them, compare them with accredited research from Western institutions, and ultimately determine whether the data was reliable or completely fabricated. Most of this work was mind-numbingly tedious. Atmospheric research can take you to fascinating places, but in this case, my travel was limited to trips between my desk, the coffee machine, and the bathroom. I must have gone through over 100 research papers, and for the most part, the data seemed at least reasonably credible. The occasional errors or anomalies usually indicated genuine mistakes rather than intentional deception. Then, after weeks of slogging through old reports, I came across two specific documents that grabbed my attention in a way nothing else had. Both were thousands of words long, and their implications were disturbing. I'll summarize them as clearly as I can before sharing my own theories. The first report, which initially caught my eye, described an effort to recover valuable equipment from a research station in a remote part of Uzbekistan's Kazan province. The facility was apparently quite large, consisting of multiple sites spread across several square miles. You can even see its outline on satellite images if you look at coordinates 46 degrees 52 minutes 19 seconds north, 59 degrees 18 minutes 43 seconds east. Today, a natural gas corporation called Telsa Energo claims to operate there. But back in the early 1970s, it was a Soviet research installation, abandoned in a hurry following what was vaguely described as an extreme weather event. No specifics were given about this weather anomaly, but whatever happened, it was severe enough that the site was completely deserted instead of being decommissioned in the usual step-by-step manner. This left the Uzbek Meteorological Bureau Uzmet, as it was called, facing a major problem. According to the report, a significant amount of costly and irreplaceable research equipment was left behind, and their superiors in Moscow were demanding its retrieval. Normally, the process would have been simple: confirm the site was safe, send in engineers, and transport the materials. But things weren't that straightforward. The document stated that helicopters were unable to approach the site due to persistent hazardous weather conditions. The alternative, traveling by rail, was also impossible since the railway line leading to the station had been decommissioned during the original evacuation. That left just one option: sending a recovery team on foot, despite the treacherous terrain and freezing conditions, which meant a grueling 48-hour trek through harsh winter landscapes. And that's where the story took a strange turn. The idea that 6 men were expected to haul heavy scientific equipment over nearly 70 miles of frozen wasteland made no sense. The only logical conclusion was that the real objective wasn't retrieval, it was assessment. They were likely sent to survey the site, determine the extent of the damage, and see if anything was worth salvaging. The second report confirmed this. It outlined the mission plan in greater detail, but that's where the information stopped. No third report, no follow-up, no documentation about what happened after the team was sent in on November 14, 1974. I searched frantically through stacks of papers for any mention of the mission's outcome. Nothing. I asked my colleagues to keep an eye out for any documents dated after that day. Weeks passed. Still nothing. It was as if the recovery team had vanished. The 6 men, whose names appeared frequently in reports before November 1974, were never mentioned again in any subsequent research papers. Not a single trace. And that's when I started to suspect something far more disturbing had happened at that research station. If the team had died in a severe blizzard, that alone wouldn't explain why their names were erased from all records. If they had simply gone missing, wouldn't there be some follow-up investigation? The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. What kind of extreme weather could wipe out an entire facility and then prevent a well-equipped recovery team from even making it back? I don't have concrete proof, but based on what I've seen, I think something extraordinary happened at that site. Something so terrifying that Soviet authorities covered it up completely. The Soviets had a track record of burying disasters, as they later attempted with Chernobyl. But unlike Chernobyl, this event never made the history books. And that's what scares me the most. Because if they sealed off that site for a reason, what happens if that reason is still there? Longtime lurker here, finally sending in a story, and you'll be glad to know this isn't just another creepy guy staring tale. This is the story of how my best friend from college and I nearly got killed in the woods. And before you start thinking, nearly got killed probably just means a lot of staring and no actual danger, hold tight because I have both the story and the scar to prove it. I have no idea what got into my buddy Colin and me during our second year at the University of Colorado in Boulder, but we went down a serious survivalist rabbit hole. We were living together off campus, both working part-time jobs, and being so close to places like Bear Peak and Twin Sisters Peak, we got more and more into hiking as a way to work out and clear our heads. We'd done a lot of hiking our first year while living in the dorms, but once we moved into an apartment near Arapahoe Avenue, we saw a movie one night, somewhere around mid-October, that completely changed our perspective. If I remember right, the movie was called Survive. It was about a South American soccer team whose plane crashes in the Andes. The few survivors, freezing and injured, have to eat the flesh of their deceased teammates to stay alive. The energy they get from this grim act helps them make it out. The fact that it was all based on a real event fascinated Colin and me even more. It made us ask ourselves, what would we do in that situation? The main debate became just how desperate we'd have to be before resorting to cannibalism. Obviously, we had no intention of testing that, but we could do the next best thing. Head up into the mountains during peak snowfall and try to camp out for a night or two to see if we could handle extreme conditions. Now, this is the part where I strongly advise you not to try this yourself. Camping in the wilderness is risky at the best of times, but doing it in the dead of winter is just reckless. Naturally, being young and stupid, Colin and I thought it was an incredible idea and immediately started planning for a trip sometime after the holidays. We spent winter break making preparations, and the first weekend back at school, we drove up to Pine Valley Ranch Park near Buffalo Creek. We parked the car, then hiked several miles into the forest, heading toward Raleigh Peak. After a couple of miles, we found a perfect, secluded spot among some pines, set down our gear, and started clearing space for camp. I won't bore you with a play-by-play of just how miserable it was, but holy hell, it sucked. Everything stayed damp no matter what we did, and we could barely keep the fire going. Sleep was nearly impossible. It was so brutal that we decided to pack up and leave around 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning, using the first light to find our way back to the car and escape to the warmth of home and hot showers. Inside the tent, I used my portable stove. If you don't have one, get one, to make us some coffee. Once we were warmed up and caffeinated, we started packing up. Colin finished a couple of minutes before me, opened the tent flap, and told me he was stepping away to relieve himself. I just grunted, still half asleep, and kept packing. Moments later, Colin came back, squatted by the tent entrance, and asked, "Is your knife within reach?" The first thought that popped into my head was that he'd spotted a bear. Sometimes they wake up early from hibernation, and without food around, they're incredibly dangerous. I asked what was going on, and he just said, "There's a guy. He was watching me." At first, I was relieved it wasn't some starving, desperate bear. In fact, I almost laughed, thinking it was just some early morning hiker who happened to stumble upon Colin midstream. But then Colin added, "He has a gun." That still didn't immediately freak me out. Sure, it was completely the wrong season for hunting anything other than maybe elk, but this was Colorado. Seeing an armed person in the mountains wasn't exactly rare. Maybe I was too exhausted, too cold, or just too focused on getting out of there, but I wasn't grasping the seriousness of the situation. Or maybe Colin wasn't explaining it well enough. I don't know. But instead of panicking, I just sat there, confused, when we really should have been running. Then Colin suddenly turned to look behind him and screamed, "Get out of the tent!" I hadn't even finished packing yet, but I scrambled out like he said, and that's when I finally saw what had him so freaked out. Standing there was a hunter all alone, wearing a ski mask, one of those with a single hole covering his entire face. He didn't say a word as we got to our feet and backed away from the tent. I can't remember exactly what we said, but it was something along the lines of, "Hey, we don't want any trouble. If we're on private land, we didn't realize, we'll leave." We kept talking, trying to de-escalate, but the guy just stood there, silent. Then suddenly he raised his rifle and took aim at us. What happened next is kind of a blur. I remember seeing the gun come up, and then we both turned and ran for our lives. The first gunshot was deafening, echoing through the trees as we sprinted away. It felt like forever before the second shot rang out. I remember thinking, asterisk, he's aiming. Any second now, I'm dead. Asterisk. Then bang. I felt something slam into the back of my left thigh. I hit the ground hard and half expected my leg to stop working. But it didn't. I could still move. Colin grabbed me, helped me up, and we kept running. I knew I was hit. Not just from the initial impact, but because of the weird mix of hot and cold spreading across my leg. Warm blood was pouring down, but the freezing air was making my skin feel numb. It was a sensation I never want to experience again. Long story short, we managed to make it down the mountain. Either the hunter couldn't get another shot, lost track of us, or simply decided to leave before we found help. When we finally got to safety, I realized how unbelievably lucky I'd been. The bullet hadn't hit me directly. Instead, it shattered against a tree, sending fragments flying. One sharp piece sliced open the back of my thigh while I was mid-sprint. The doctor later told me that if the bullet had hit the tree at a slightly different angle, or if I'd been running just a little slower, the fragment could have punctured my femoral artery. If that had happened, I would have bled out within minutes. As for the guy who shot at us, the police questioned a few hunters in the area but never arrested anyone. No charges were ever filed. If you ask me, I don't think he planned to shoot people that day. I think he was just a lunatic who saw an opportunity and took it. There are some people out there who are just itching to know what it feels like to kill. And while I'd never say all hunters are like that, not by a long shot, I do know for a fact that at least one of them is. I grew up in a small town called Clearwater, a quiet little place in Canada about a couple of hours' drive from Calgary. Tucked along the bend of a winding river, the town took its name from the clear waters that ran through it. It was a wonderful place to spend my childhood, and for nearly half the year, it would transform into a true winter paradise. Because of that, winter activities played a huge role in my upbringing, from playing ice hockey to building snow forts and having snowball fights with my childhood best friend, who lived just down Maple Street. Alberta was my home, and I always believed the furthest I'd ever move would be to Calgary for work. But life had other plans, and my family took me farther away than I ever expected. My career eventually led me to settle in Sydney, Australia. I moved there in 2006, met someone special, got married, and we decided to start our family there. Since my relatives were better able to travel, they would visit us in Sydney once or twice a year to see their grandkids. My children grew up only hearing stories about where I came from, but they had never actually experienced it, especially the snow. By the time my daughter, Sophie, turned 6 and my son, Leo, was 4, my wife and I decided it was time for them to see my hometown. We planned a trip to Alberta for the holiday season in 2016. Sophie was thrilled beyond words, though Leo, being younger, didn't quite grasp what was in store for him. The moment we landed in Calgary and made the long drive to my parents' house, the kids were in awe of the endless blankets of fluffy white snow covering both sides of the road. Getting to show them where I grew up was an unforgettable experience, and spending time with their grandparents was a joy. But what mesmerized them most was, of course, the snow. In Australia, Christmas looks just like it does in Canada in terms of decorations and festivities, but the scorching summer heat makes it feel completely different. While Canada is covered in ice and frost, Australians are dealing with sweltering temperatures. I'll never get used to seeing fake snow on shop signs when it's nearly 40 degrees Celsius outside. I swear, if Aussies had the chance, they'd freeze the entire country for a day just to get that classic Christmas feel. For my kids, though, experiencing an actual snowy Christmas was like stepping into a fairy tale. and it cost a lot less than a trip to Disneyland. Every free moment, they wanted to be outside, sledding, making snow angels, and rolling massive snowballs to build an army of snowmen. Even the winter clothes were a novelty to them. Sophie once joked she wasn't sure if she felt more like an explorer or an astronaut in all her layers. They were completely captivated. Then, my wife saw an ad for a winter camping trip at a place called Timber Ridge Lodge. They offered cozy yurt stays, and it seemed like the perfect way to immerse the kids in the winter magic. We booked a night stay and arrived there on December 22nd, settling in by midday. By early afternoon, we were outside, happily crafting an entire snow village. As the sky began to darken, my wife went into the yurt to start cooking dinner on the portable stove provided by the lodge. The kids and I kept playing, the cold barely registering in our excitement. After an intense snowball fight where Sophie and Leo joined forces against me, we were all exhausted and ready to eat. Since we were only about 50 yards from the yurt, I told Sophie to keep an eye on her little brother while I jogged back to check on dinner. My wife said it would be ready in a few minutes, so I quickly returned, only to find Sophie rolling another snowball alone. Leo was gone. Panic hit me instantly. I scanned the area, expecting to see him just a few steps away, but he was nowhere in sight. When I asked Sophie where he was, she looked around, her face turning pale as she realized she had no idea. Her voice wavered as she whispered, "I don't know." Fear gripped me, but I forced myself to think logically. The snow gave me an advantage. I could follow his footprints. I spotted his tiny boot tracks leading away, so I took off running. The trail led me through the snow until I reached a sight that made my blood run cold. A stream. It wasn't especially wide or deep, but for a 4-year-old, it was a serious danger. There were some stepping stones near a shallower section, but if Leo had fallen downstream, he could have been carried away by the icy water. My mind spiraled into the worst possibilities as I ran along the bank, shouting his name at the top of my lungs. Sophie had followed me, and I could hear her crying behind me, her fear mirroring my own. Just as my desperation reached its peak, I heard a small voice call out. I turned to see Leo standing on the other side of the stream, completely unharmed. He wasn't crying, not even a little bit. Instead, he was just trudging through the snow like nothing unusual had happened. Relief flooded me as I leaped across the stream, ran to him, and scooped him into my arms. He seemed startled by my reaction and only started crying when he saw his sister's tears. We returned to the yurt, where my wife, utterly confused and then furious, demanded to know what had happened. We were all shaken, but overwhelmingly relieved. Could have ended so much worse. After dinner, as I tucked Leo into bed, I asked him a simple question that had been gnawing at my mind. "How did you get across that stream, buddy?" His answer made my stomach twist. "The snowman carried me." A chill ran down my spine. Of course, no actual snowman had carried my son across a freezing stream, but someone or something had. Trying to stay calm, I gently asked if he meant a person in white clothes or maybe someone covered in snow. He just shook his head and repeated, "The snowman carried me," before drifting off to sleep. My wife and I shared a look, and within minutes, we were packing up our things, dressing the kids, and heading straight for our car. We told one of the lodge staff members on our way out, but we had no intention of staying to see what else might happen. The next morning, I called the police. By that evening, they confirmed my worst fear. Alongside my son's footprints on the opposite side of the stream were much larger prints. Prints that belonged to an adult. Someone had taken him. Maybe they got scared by my shouts. Maybe they thought better of it at the last moment. But the fact remained. A stranger had lifted my son and carried him away, only to abandon him again moments later. When asked, Leo confirmed that the person had been wearing light-colored clothing and a hat. They hadn't spoken to him, hadn't frightened him. When I asked if he had been scared at all, he simply said, "No." That fact alone unsettled me more than anything else. Maybe he thought it was me. Maybe he was too caught up in the wonder of it all. Or maybe something far stranger had taken place that night. To this day, I don't like to think about it. A few years back in 2018, my girlfriend and I were on a road trip through Alberta, Canada. We had rented a car in Calgary and planned a circular route, driving up towards Jasper, looping back down through Banff, and finally making our way back to Calgary through Canmore. Altogether, we traveled for about a month, mostly staying at campgrounds in national parks or resting at roadside stops along the way. One evening, while driving along a stretch of highway between Cranbrook and Nelson, we pulled into a remote provincial park campground to spend the night. It was a peaceful area by a lake, with a spacious parking lot, picnic tables, and a wooden shelter, though it was far from any town or city. A few other campers were already there, some in RVs and trailers, while others, like us, were using tents. We arrived before dusk, set up our tent, and exchanged polite greetings with some of the other campers. One man in particular stood out. He was an older fellow, probably in his mid-60s, staying in a motorhome. He was friendly but talked a little too much. Noticing our small coffee pot, he mentioned that he had a 5-kilogram bag of coffee beans in his vehicle and offered to give us some. But then he mentioned that he didn't actually drink coffee because he didn't like the taste. This struck us as a bit odd. He insisted that we come to his motorhome to take some beans, but we politely declined. Eventually, he left us alone. After pitching our tent, we went to the shelter to cook dinner. My girlfriend and I exchanged looks, both of us feeling somewhat uneasy about the man, though we weren't sure if he was just lonely or something else. As we cooked, we noticed him wandering toward the lake, possibly for a walk. While we ate, we saw him returning and trying to stay out of sight. We avoided eye contact and focused on our meal, hoping he wouldn't approach us. Unfortunately, he did. Despite the fact that we were clearly in the middle of eating, he started talking to us again. Neither of us wanted to be rude, so we nodded and responded as briefly as possible. While we don't recall everything he said, some of his questions stood out. He asked if we were married, if we lived together, whether we had kids, and if we wanted to have kids in the future. While such questions might be normal coming from a family member or friend, coming from a complete stranger, they felt a little too intrusive. He also noticed we were drinking water and asked if we liked soda. He mentioned that he had a pack of cans in his motorhome if we wanted some. Again, he added that he didn't drink soda himself. He insisted that we come to his motorhome to grab some, but we declined once more. My girlfriend and I exchanged another glance. We both felt incredibly uneasy. Sensing he wouldn't leave us alone, we quickly finished dinner and made excuses to leave. After cleaning up, putting everything in the car, and preparing the tent for the night, he approached us yet again. He repeated his offer for soda and even invited us to join him in his motorhome to watch TV. We declined as politely as possible. The sun was setting by this time, so we decided to take a short walk down to the lake, brushing our teeth along the way and carrying our trash bags to dispose of in the bins at the bottom of the parking lot. As we neared the bins, we noticed a large shadow leaning into one of them. Before we could react, the figure jumped down onto all fours and bolted toward the trees. My girlfriend and I froze. It was unmistakable. A big cat-like creature with a long, sleek tail. We had just interrupted a cougar rummaging through the garbage. Thankfully, it was more afraid of us than we were of it, and it disappeared into the forest before we could even process what had happened. Shaken, we quickly turned back and hurried up the hill. We both agreed that we would sleep in the car that night instead of the tent. We weren't sure if the cougar would linger nearby, and we didn't want to take any risks. We reclined the seats, locked the doors, and settled in for the night. With the close call with the cougar fresh in our minds, we had all but forgotten about the unsettling old man. At dawn, before most of the other campers were awake, we packed up the tent and got out of there as fast as possible. We didn't see the strange man again and continued our journey, relieved to have left that situation behind. Looking back, we wondered if we had misjudged him. Maybe he was just an elderly man seeking company. But we both felt that something was off, and our instincts told us to keep our distance. Later that day, I got a call from my brother back home. He had seen the news and was checking in to make sure we were okay. Apparently, there was a manhunt underway in Alberta for 2 fugitives suspected of killing 3 people further north, near the Yukon border. The suspects looked nothing like the man we had encountered, but it still made us think about his true intentions. Reflecting on that experience, we sometimes wonder if we were being paranoid or if we narrowly avoided something much worse. One thing is certain, if your gut tells you something isn't right, always trust it. Shout, my name is Adam, I'm from Chicago, and I'm Muslim. Back in 2016, I was always bullied in middle school for being Muslim. People would call me awful names and insult me, but no one was worse than these two bullies of mine, Jake and Ryan. They took things to a whole other level. The things they did to me included pulling my pants down, beating me up, chasing me, shoving me into lockers, and even dunking my head into toilets, all because of my religion. I had a few friends who weren't prejudiced but didn't step in when they saw me getting harassed. Now to the main part of the story. It was the first weekend of December, and winter was setting in fast. My parents had no major plans, so they decided to take a trip to our cabin upstate in Wisconsin. I invited my best friend, Chris, to come along since we had been close for years. We left the city around 6 o'clock on Friday evening and arrived at the cabin at about 8:40. When we got there, we unpacked, took off our shoes, changed into our night clothes, brushed our teeth, and went to bed. My parents stayed in their bedroom, while Chris and I shared another room. The next morning, after breakfast, Chris and I wanted to go geocaching, as the cabin was right next to a large forest with many hiking trails. We had been geocaching since first grade and loved the thrill of it. My parents allowed us to go, but we had a strict time limit of 4 hours. We set off, and after about an hour and a half, we had already found 4 or 5 caches. We logged our names in a notebook and swapped small items before returning them to their hiding spots. Soon, we arrived at a waterfall, and it was a beautiful sight. The next cache was about 0.4 miles away, so we continued walking while chatting and searching. Suddenly, we heard a noise behind us. When we turned around, we saw something that was scarier than any horror movie I had ever watched. Standing there were Jake and Ryan, my bullies from school. How in the world did they know exactly where we would be? Did they have a cabin nearby too? Had they followed us? How was that even possible? They couldn't have made it here on their own, considering we were all the same age and in middle school. My mind was racing, and I blurted out, "What the hell are you doing here? How did you even find us?" Jake smirked and said, "You thought you could get away from us? Wrong." That's when I noticed something large in his hand. A knife. My heart sank. Before I could react, Ryan rushed toward me, grabbing me from behind in a tight grip. I struggled, but he was much stronger. He started dragging me towards the edge of the waterfall, where there were no railings or barriers, just a steep drop into the freezing water below. Panic surged through me. Did he really intend to hurt me? I heard Chris shouting for help and turned my head just enough to see Jake holding him, pressing the knife to his neck. Both of us were in real danger. I tried to break free from Ryan's grip, but he held me even tighter. "This is what you get, you terrorist. My great-uncle died in 9/11 because of people like you." He spat, his voice filled with rage. I pleaded with him, explaining that my parents were born in the US and that we weren't even very religious, but he refused to listen. I started crying and screaming for him to let me go, but his grip stayed firm. Suddenly, loud gunshots rang out behind us. We all turned, and Ryan instantly released me. I collapsed onto my knees. That's when I saw a hunter sprinting toward us, rifle in hand, yelling for them to back off. He kept shouting for them to leave. Jake and Ryan, realizing they were caught, ran off and disappeared into the woods. The hunter cautiously approached Chris and me, asking if we were okay. We shakily assured him that we were, thanking him repeatedly. He asked who the 2 guys were, and we explained that they were school bullies who had somehow followed us all the way from the city to upstate. The man was in complete disbelief. He offered to give us a ride home, and we accepted. About 15 minutes later, we walked through the door, and my mom immediately asked who the man was. My parents looked confused, and I didn't blame them. I told them that this man had saved us from 2 bullies who had been tormenting me at school. At first, they seemed skeptical, but after we explained everything in detail, their expressions changed to shock. We all went to the police station to report the incident. Chris and the hunter gave their statements while my parents waited in the lobby. The officers thanked us and said they would try to contact our school board back in the city. That night and the following day were quiet. We didn't do much but tried to process everything that had happened. By Sunday evening, we were back in the city. I was still shaken up, but I managed to calm down over time. On Monday, I was called to the principal's office and was informed that Jake and Ryan had both been expelled for what they did to Chris and me. I was relieved, knowing they wouldn't be able to torment me anymore. The rest of my school years went fairly smoothly. Occasionally, I would still hear ignorant kids call me names, but I didn't take it too personally. I never saw Ryan again, and the last time I saw Jake was in 2020 while walking down a street. He passed me without even looking in my direction. As of today, no one has insulted me for being Muslim in Chicago, as people have become more accepting. Though I have moved on, whenever I hear someone say hateful things about Muslims, whether online or in person, this memory resurfaces, reminding me that, unfortunately, there will always be people filled with hatred in this world. Alaska is the ideal place to escape from society. As the least densely populated state in the US, it offers plenty of space, far from authorities or nosy strangers who might want to pry into your business. Because of this, my home state attracts all kinds of unusual and sometimes unsettling groups. I've stumbled upon isolated Scientology centers hidden at the ends of dirt roads, heard stories about survivalists who built bunkers out of old shipping containers deep in the mountains, and even met people who managed to escape from religious sects that kept their members completely cut off from the outside world. You can find all this and more in Alaska. I was born and raised in Anchorage, the biggest city in the state. Back when I was growing up, the population hovered around 250,000, and you could drive across town in about 30 minutes. That should give you an idea of what we consider a big city up here. The only other significant city in the state is Fairbanks, and the two are linked by a long 360-mile, two-lane highway. Driving between them takes about 7 hours, but the journey is breathtaking. The route takes you past towering mountains as you drive through Denali National Park, then leads through enormous canyons carved out by ancient glaciers and rivers. Past Denali, it's another 3 hours of driving through flatlands, with distant mountain ranges on the horizon. I say all this to help you understand just how isolated Alaska truly is. Even when traveling on the main highway, once you leave Anchorage or Fairbanks, all you see is endless wilderness, apart from the occasional tiny town with maybe 1,000 residents on a busy day. A decade ago, it was even sparser. Alaskan women are built tough. We change tires, hunt, fish, camp, and love the outdoors in ways that city-dwelling women from the lower 48 states might not. People joke that Anchorage is the biggest rural town in America. That sets the stage for my story. Back in high school, things felt different, at least they did to me. I was young, reckless, and thought I was invincible thanks to that rugged, self-sufficient mindset I was raised with. In my senior year, I decided to treat myself to a solo camping trip in the mountains past Talkeetna. Nothing fancy, just a night or two in the most beautiful place on earth during the best time of year, mid-June. Camping up north during peak summer is a surreal experience. The sun never truly sets. If you've ever seen the movie Midsummer, it's like that. Just a long, endless dusk that never quite turns into night. That false sense of security, the idea that daylight meant safety, almost got me killed. My second mistake? Not telling anyone where I was going. I simply packed my things, grabbed lunch at a sandwich shop, and set out for the mountains. The drive was peaceful, about 2.5 hours of winding roads, music playing on the radio, and stunning scenery. As I passed through the Matanuska Valley and climbed into the mountains, tall evergreen trees lined both sides of the road, occasionally interrupted by cleared patches from logging. Even though I was heading into the wild, these reminders of human activity made me feel like I wasn't completely alone. That illusion led to my worst mistake: not staying in a designated campground. As a broke high school student with only a part-time job, I didn't want to pay the $15 campsite fee. At the same time, I was too nervous about getting fined for illegal camping, so I decided to find a free spot off the road. A map my dad had given me showed an abandoned mining site up in the hills, so I figured that would be the perfect place to set up camp. It must have seemed adventurous at the time. Spending the night in an old ghost town sounded thrilling. I parked my car, packed my bag, grabbed my map and compass, and started hiking. I'd done this sort of thing before. My dad had taken me on countless backpacking trips, and I'd taken wilderness survival classes at camp. I wasn't some clueless kid wandering off into the forest, or so I thought. After a solid 45-minute hike uphill, I arrived at what was supposed to be the old mining camp, but there was nothing there, just a cracked concrete foundation and a few holes in the ground. Disappointed but not shocked, I set up camp nearby, gathering firewood to cook my dinner on the old slabs. It's a standard rule to keep your cooking area away from your tent, just in case any hungry bears come sniffing around. By now, it was about 10 p.m., but the sun was still hanging low in the sky. By the time I finished eating, it was nearly 11. I was exhausted, so I crawled into my tent and dozed off, feeling secure in my secluded little spot. That security shattered when I woke up to the sound of movement in the distance, something large pushing through the underbrush. My first thought was hunters. My dad and I had run into hunters on past trips, so I assumed they'd pass through without incident. I relaxed and shut my eyes again. Then I heard a man's voice. "Who the hell is camping on our land?" I froze. My stomach dropped. I had seriously messed up. I started getting up, reaching for my bag, planning to step out and apologize, when I heard the man again. "If we find you, you're dead. Trespassers get shot." My blood ran cold. Everything changed in an instant. I couldn't pack up and leave, not with armed men combing the woods. I slipped on my shoes, grabbed my keys, and quietly crept away into the dense forest. My plan was to stay hidden, wait for them to give up, then sneak back to grab my things and get out. For 20 agonizing minutes, I lay low behind a fallen tree, barely daring to breathe, while they searched. Then another voice rang out they'd found my campsite. I heard them tearing my tent apart, rummaging through my belongings. "Still warm," one of them muttered, "and a chick left her underwear behind." Another voice snapped, "Fan out. Find her. She thinks she can trespass here? She's gonna regret it." I didn't care that they'd found my spare change of clothes. All that mattered was getting out. Fast. Slowly, I crept downhill, carefully avoiding branches and leaves. After about 30 minutes, their voices started fading. That's when I panicked and ran. I sprinted through the underbrush, stumbling, cutting my hands and knees on rocks and roots. I didn't care. I just had to get to the road. Finally, I burst out of the trees onto the pavement and realized my car was missing. I'd parked somewhere along this road, but in my panic, I wasn't sure which way to go. I picked a direction and walked. Then I saw it, my car parked up ahead, and standing beside it, 2 armed men in military-style gear. Heart pounding, I dove into the bushes and watched. A few minutes later, more men emerged from the trail, carrying my gear. They dumped everything beside my car, climbed onto their ATVs, and drove off. When I finally dared to approach, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. "If we ever catch you here again, we won't be so nice. Consider this your only warning." They had slashed my tent, shredded my sleeping bag, and destroyed everything I'd brought. Honestly, I was lucky. That night, I learned a hard lesson. Since then, I've only camped in designated areas. If you're ever thinking about heading into the wilderness alone, take my advice. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Could cost you more than just your camping gear. This happened when I was 18. My boyfriend at the time and 2 of our friends decided to camp in a small wooded area near a housing complex that was still being built. When I say small, I mean it wasn't very big. On either side, there were unfinished houses with no proper walls, windows, or doors, just bare frameworks. On the other side, a long, empty driveway stretched out, leading to a house that was set back at least half a mile beyond the tree line. Once night fell, the place felt completely abandoned. We arrived in the late afternoon, set up our tent, started a fire, arranged some chairs, just the usual things for a night outdoors. It was getting dark, and we were sitting around the fire, relaxing, when we suddenly heard a scream. At first, it seemed to be coming from about 400 to 500 feet away, deeper into the woods. It was loud, frantic, a woman's scream. At first, we couldn't make out any actual words, but then we started to hear distinct cries of "help!" and "no!" The final scream was the worst. It was cut off mid-sentence, leaving behind an eerie, suffocating silence. The woods were dense, and as the light faded, it became nearly impossible to see beyond the fire's glow. None of us knew what to do, but we all agreed on one thing: we needed to get the hell out of there. We didn't even bother packing up. We just ran. The way out wasn't simple either. The screaming had come from the direction of the unfinished houses, right where we had parked the car. That meant we couldn't go straight back. Instead, we had to circle around the edge of the woods, past the driveway, and loop back toward the construction site from the main road. As soon as we got out of the trees, I called the police. I was panicked, trying to explain what I had just heard, but the dispatcher brushed it off. "Probably just an animal," they said, but I knew what I had heard wasn't any animal. When we finally reached the car, it was parked facing the woods. We stood there, trying to catch our breath, still shaking, when we noticed movement. A man stepped out of the trees. He was dragging something heavy, wrapped in what looked like a sheet or some kind of fabric. He saw us. For a second, we just stared at each other, frozen. Then he started walking toward us. His steps were slow, controlled. He never looked away. I was fumbling to keep the police on the phone, my hands shaking. But just as he got closer, a police car pulled into the housing development. The man dropped whatever he had been dragging and bolted back into the woods. The officers chased after him, and eventually we learned the horrifying truth. He had just murdered a woman, only 400 feet from where we had been camping. To this day, I still get chills thinking about how close we were to being his next victims. And I can't step foot in a forest without hearing those screams in my head. I've had my fair share of eerie moments while hiking, but a couple of them remain burned in my memory. The summer after I finished high school, I decided to take a solo overnight trip in a forest near an abandoned estate. It was supposed to be a relaxing escape. Just me, the wilderness, and some good food. I set up a comfortable campsite, even built a small barrier of branches around my spot for a little extra security. By the time I was getting ready to cook a steak over the fire, I felt completely at peace. That's when I heard it. At first, it was just the faint rustling of leaves, something large moving through the trees at a steady, deliberate pace. The steps were slow but heavy, almost rhythmic, like thump, thump, thump. I froze, listening closely, then called out, "Hello?" hoping to scare off whatever it was. The sound didn't stop, kept getting closer and closer. It was so near that I should have been able to see whatever was making the noise with my headlamp. Heart pounding, I swept the light around in every direction, but there was nothing. The footsteps stopped, but the oppressive feeling of being watched remained. That was enough for me. I grabbed my car keys and ran, leaving all my gear behind. As I sat in my car, trying to calm my racing heart, a new panic hit me. I had left the fire burning. The last thing I wanted was to start a wildfire. Summoning what little courage I had left, I forced myself to go back. The only way into the wooded area was a narrow gravel road, overgrown with weeds. As I walked, the same sound returned, this time bouncing off the trees around me. The heavy footsteps followed me, matching my pace, getting closer with each step. I didn't stop to figure out what it was. The next day, I returned with my brother. Thankfully, the fire had died out on its own, though my steak had been completely charred in the flames. A sad, fly-covered reminder of my panicked escape. That wasn't my only strange encounter in that area. Another evening, I was out for a run near dusk, not far from where I had camped. I was hurrying back to my car, worried I'd get locked inside the gates leading to the old farmland. The road out passed a forgotten trail, one said to be thousands of years old, cutting through a shallow stream. As I rounded a bend near the path, I saw something standing ahead of me, about 50 feet away. A figure, It was completely still, human-shaped, with long hair, draped in a thick robe-like garment. At first, I barely noticed it, just another shadow blending into the darkening trees. But as I got closer, I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure didn't move, didn't react. It stood there, motionless, as if watching the ancient trail. I raised a hand in a hesitant wave, hoping to get some kind of response. Nothing. The air around me felt thick, almost suffocating in its silence. I didn't stick around to find out more. Instead, I veered off the road and sprinted through a nearby field, not stopping until I reached my car. Could it have been some random person? Maybe, but something about the unnatural stillness of that figure, the way it blended into the darkness, didn't feel right. These experiences remind me of a story an old man once told me. He used to work at the estate back in the 1930s. He's long gone now, but he always swore that, as a kid, he and some others once saw a soldier ride by on horseback. The disturbing part? The rider was missing everything below his chest. There's something undeniably strange about those woods. I don't know what it is, but I don't like going back. Back in college, from 2009 to 2015, I was really into metal detecting. I knew about an old military trail and river crossing deep in a remote section of the woods, a spot that I was pretty sure not many people knew about. One cold morning, I finally decided to take my metal detector out there. The trail was about a mile or two from a public park along the Clear Fork River near Abilene, Texas. I parked my SUV, gathered my gear, including a digging knife, and started my trek through the thick woods and underbrush to find the trail. About halfway into the trees, I came across a small clearing and noticed a campsite about 40 yards from the river. It was isolated, with old cans, clothes, and scattered belongings that made it clear someone had been living there. I didn't stick around and kept moving. Just as I was passing the tent, a rough-looking man suddenly emerged from the brush only a few feet away. We startled each other. After a brief exchange of awkward small talk, he asked what I was doing out there. I explained my metal detecting hobby and mentioned the old trail, then casually lied and said that a lot of hobbyists knew about the spot. That seemed to make him uneasy. He started asking if I had messed with his campsite. I reassured him that I hadn't, except for accidentally stepping on one of his cans. He seemed most concerned about whether or not I had looked inside the tent, which I honestly hadn't. The man went on to say that his wife had kicked him out of their apartment a few days ago, so he was just camping in the woods until he could figure things out. Something about his story felt off, but I didn't press him for details. After a bit more conversation, I told him I was going to continue on my way. He gave me a strange look and suggested that I avoid going behind his campsite because he had recently used the bathroom there. Whether or not that was true, I had no intention of sticking around much longer anyway. I moved a little further toward the trail I had originally planned to search, but something about the encounter left me uneasy. Instead of continuing, I changed course, walked down to the river, and made my way back to my SUV at a fast pace. I never saw the guy again until about 2 years later. His picture showed up in the local news. He had been arrested for killing his wife and burying her in that very patch of woods where I had run into him. From what I read, the timeline suggested he had just finished the burial around the time I encountered him that day. Whether or not it was the exact day of the crime, I'll never know, but I'll never forget that moment.